Hi, thanks Ingo for the introduction that, as usual, put so much burden on one that it's almost very hard to do an informal talk. But anyway, I hope to be able to at least partially fulfill the expectations anyway. I have a lecture here that is trying to be informal, but has a topic that's called formal process. And it comes from thought about architecture as it is now generated in relationship to the new tools and specifically to algorithms. So I will show some of my own work and the basis for it, and then about half of it is going to be studio. But I'll introduce also some of my student work, and it's all in process. So mostly urban stuff. Okay, here you see Xenakis with a score of Phytocracta. It's a very interesting piece where the tones are generated as a cloud and statistically pointed so that they are not moved one by one, but in general, in an overview. And it's a very, I think, inspiring thought. Also, since the thinking about ordering and about organization that is behind it is, I think, radical. You can see that Xenakis doesn't see order and disorder as poles, as total opposites, as completely disjunct parts, but he argues for a gradient of organization and about reason kind of introducing some degrees. And all this is about process, how to get organization going step by step, and how to make architecture kind of follow a bit arts of performance, although it is normally thought of as an art of space. And one could say that modernists were considering space as the main medium of architecture, but I would say, and that's the title for the lecture, that process and therefore the performative is the new medium of architecture. So here, for instance, you can see New York as it is currently mapped by Dill ranking, and you can see different islands forming, different densities. What is interesting is that in opposition, for instance, to Greg Lynn's, to Graham Kohlhaas' Delirious New York, where the argument would be that each block is separate, you can see that in fact the blocks create a continuum, clouds, where downtown is tall, midtown also, and they also have various functions and various real estate values. So one of the thoughts was how to formally explain this occurrence that is in contradiction to the discreteness of the grid and of the top-down commissioner plan from 1812. And I just want to introduce one simple formal process that most of you know. I'm sorry to repeat myself in that case, but it is a process that got Schelling a Nobel Prize in economics, and it just very simply explains, I'll just quickly explain that, how neighborhoods can be formed and how segregation happens in cities. So you can see various elements of a city, let's say houses, they could be blue, they could be green, and you can have preferences for a color. So you live in a blue house, you want that over half of your neighborhood is blue. If that's not the case, you move to a spot where that happens. And here you can see 12 iterations. They were divided, but the color is not very well seen on the projector. From a totally random state until where at the end you get neighborhoods that adjust to each other. And it's interesting as a result of this formal process of segregation that if you had at the beginning a 50% preference for similar neighbors, that could be also in terms of Manhattan functions like business or formal commonalities as shape, size. If you had a 50% preference, so at least 50% of your neighbors should be similar, at the end you get 80% or more segregation. And that happens over time. So I'm not saying this is in Manhattan a completely bottom-up process, just based on similar segregation flows, but because of course there are attractors also influencing it. As you can see, the building of Rockefeller Center and also Grand Central, that for instance spurred the growth of Manhattan. There is a kind of complementarity between attractors, strong buildings that pull energy into their zone of influence, and the formal bottom-up processes, as I mentioned, for instance, in terms of the segregation. And there's also the top-down grid, for instance. So you can see here also Grand Central as it was evolving and as it pulled some buildings into its context. Okay, so here's my last student project from a few years ago in Princeton, where I took West Side rail yards of New York and tried to use a similar process to organize program. So I would randomly pour in some functions with different spatial characteristics, spans, sizes, heights, and so on, and then have them gradually come like to like, or create these gradients of programs and also gradients of spaces. And you can see in the image this gradient not only of functions but of spatial qualities that create distortion and a certain effect of centripetal growth. Here's the final model. And so I'm just going to show some stuff I did based on that also in other offices, where Peter Eisenhower, who was in the jury, invited me for his office, and here is a competition we did in Milano. We got 4th prize, but that's because we didn't respect the master plan. So we were out. And you can see some centripetal organization of the space with a main fashion path through the building, kind of pulling the people then out into the park, and it was basically a landscape continuously flowing into the park with the catwalk hanging in the air and being the central attractor, disturbing other programmatic areas. So you can see basically then all the fashion people walking around, and it was a bit based and modeled on Sloane's house, where it's in the air, and then you can see the galleries around, if you're familiar with London Sloane's house. And that was more of a formal exploration based on the diploma, whereas then I went to OMA, where we started a parametric unit and tried to do similar things programmatically. And you can see here, for instance, a tower that starts also with some random programs of a given with a given goal of mixity, and we had them programmed to gradually form bigger and bigger clusters, so that at the end you would have kind of chunks of spaces, chunks of voids, and that got used into further projects. And it was, I think, 6 years ago. So whatever Vinimas was doing the Biennale was not that. So you can also see different void-solid ratios that this was producing. Okay, just quickly, other urban processes that would be more formal follow, and I'll just pass through quickly. You can see Chicago here in 1850 something. What is very interesting is the recurrent division of land that was happening in the US when first Jefferson divided the country into mile-long grids, and then some of these grid squares were divided further into 6x6 squares, where veterans had number 3 and number 20, schools had number 27, and so on. So there was a gradual subdivision, and then some cities grew and divided further and further. And you can see here in Chicago that even though there are very expensive central locations, they are finally subdivided, and so there is more and more empty space in relation to the build volume. But of course, the build volume then grows up. And the process is simple. You just subdivide, and I think metabolism in Tolland, that if perhaps you could watch real-time or faster than real-time time-lapse, would get something like swarm movement, which is another known computer graphic algorithms by Craig Reynolds. I won't get into it, but quickly another process, very, very fast. You see these Rust Belt cities and older industrial cities, in this case Buffalo in the States, that lose people, lose job opportunities. I mean, Buffalo was the third biggest in the States at the beginning of last century. Then they closed the canal, the economic growth stopped, and so they built a big station at the outskirts of the city, but the city got smaller and the station is now a ghost town. And also what they do here, and we know it also from shrinking cities in Europe, is they try to find a formal process to control the shrinking. And there is a zoning code in Buffalo that forces you to buy 2 houses, but destroy one. So if you go to a shop and there is an action, a deal, you buy one, get the second free. So Buffalo is exactly the opposite. You have to buy 2, you get 1 free. You have to destroy it. Okay, back to some projects. Here's a competition. We got third prize in Austria for this European City of Culture. That is our site. And it was more or less an urban competition where we were thinking about how to connect 20th century object urbanism with more compact, earlier city form. Very disjunct spatial qualities there, and we were still thinking perhaps we could still grow some interesting qualities into there. And so we looked at the old city with the ratio of solid and void, and thought that okay, here we have more or less clear objects, big boxes, what's happening normally in unfortunately most of the suburbs in Czechoslovakia nowadays. And then thought, okay, if this is the city of culture, what can we do quickly? We argued that we are in fact growing a city, but we are also growing an approach to culture where we divided culture in, let's say, 3 steps. where there's a boundless experiment, and then there's some presentation, and finally a canonical form where the show is crystal. And so we chose 3 spatial qualities: a wilderness, and then in front of each of these big boxes a void, with the big box itself being the canonical form of the symphony hall or a theater or whatever they wanted there for the City of Culture, and basically allowed some free exchange of ideas, plus some perhaps presentations in front of then the final formal canonical events. And you can see here I was all flooded in this wilderness, and then the other polarities between the voids, which had still a performing surface, and then the let's say gallery or concert hall, and so on. Here's more of this drawing of culture, which is normally opposite to nature, but we kind of cultured both nature and performance. And a second competition, I won't show more, that we got a prize for in Europan in Finland, where it was a suburban site between the formal city of Turku, which is a planned grid from the 19th century, and the suburb as we know it, basically roads, highways, and some field space. And we thought, okay, we like that suburban stuff, but why? The question was, how did it get to that point? And of course, again, reading some articles, it was about understanding how dynamically suburbs happen, and how, in fact, you try to optimize 2 poles: the access to nature, quick boundary to nature, and quick access to transport, which by extension gets you to shops, to work, and all the other stuff. And so the idea was not to create a grid of similar objects, or basically objects in a field, but to create almost an infinite boundary between landscape and architecture, which is kind of a fractal shape, where the area is limited, of course it's always limited, but the boundary is infinite, so you get as much nature as you want. Okay, so here you can see the plan, and of course there were these big orchard avenues that were kind of expanding the form into all these recesses, but you could access into cul-de-sacs and you would never cross that organizing form, so there was never, conceptually an exchange through that infinite boundary. And of course there was also gradients of publicness in these spaces, from completely public orchard to private gardens, saunas, and then houses. Okay. Not sure if I want to go into this. That's Christopher Alexander, an old diagram that I was just reading now, which basically says there is what he calls an unconscious architecture, where you basically just repair whatever is not working in the environment. That's the vernacular stuff, all the wooden villages and stuff, all the kind of pre-cultural way of building, but then you create a representation of that situation, of the form you're building and the context it has to react to. And that's where conscious architecture appears, and where problems start also to appearing, because whereas here you were just trying to solve the misfit between the form and the environment, here you have much more issues going on, where the conscious architect actually presents the work and starts to do architecture as a communication device, and it becomes as well a language as an organism that has to perform. So that's communication added on to performance. Whereas now we're in this stage where he was only grasping it in the 50s when he wrote Notes on the Synthesis of Form, that we can create a formal picture of the mental picture of the actual world, that means of the actual form and of the actual context. And we could call that simulation. So that's a more formal way to speed up the process that was working in these unconscious environments, but that is not adapted to our society with the quickly changing cultural needs. So this is what now I will try to kind of think about in relation to what we're doing in the studio. So how to create a formal picture of the process that adjusts form to context. Okay, I skipped that. It's the house we're doing in Prague, but I'll go straight to studio. We can see that in the gallery. It's a project of my studio at the academy, and we're happy we can show you a little bit. But what is important is to explain what's behind it. We are trying to understand processes, of course, but the processes in teaching, they are there since the 60s, and the question is, what's that? And as much as we design spaces, and we can design it in more formal, structured, or intuitive ways, we can also design the processes, and I think we are only at the beginning, at least in the studio, of understanding how that can be done. So here you have two images. One is Richard Dawkins. That is one pole of the thinking in the studio. And here you'll have some Palladius. The other pole, I'll get back to that. So first of all, Richard Dawkins, as I guess at least half of you know, had this book, The Blind Watchmaker, and he started talking about conceptual space. It's a very interesting space that has as many dimensions as there are parameters. And here you could say there are three spaces or three parameters, from, I don't know, the number of legs to the number of bifurcations to the angles between the bifurcations and so on. And it's just a diagram of how, well, it's on one hand partly a representation of how evolution may work, but it's also a diagram of how its fruits can be, let's say, harvested. And I think it also points to a certain problem within what we call parametricism, because in advance you have to define the amount of variables, and then the space where you move is limited and in a certain sense predictable, although you cannot encompass it. And the main idea is that just by multiplying parameters, the output is huge. But then, on the other hand, of course, I didn't put the Wittkover structure of all the Palladian villas, where he argues that there is a clear structure of a 3x5 grid, that they all vary from one to another. But that's not all. and there is a lot of other things going on in adjacent categories, or as Alexander would call it, sets that deal with the structure, like the barquetas on the side, the connection to the landscape, the symmetry versus asymmetry, all the things that are not included in the original Whitcover, the 5x3 grid. And so that's what we were trying to kind of think about in the studio. Okay, so there was a process we did as school. There was our department of painting. Students got program, everything very banal, the site, the space, whatever. But they had to organize the process. And in the visual manual, you'll see more of it shown by the students and also by Galo Moncayo, who was leading the interaction workshop. I'm just going to quickly introduce the structure of these processes. So first, students had to automatically match a criterion. We were pushing them to automatize the optimization, because one of the arguments also was that we can currently create a huge amount of forms by just setting a few parameters and then doing all the crazy variations it allows us, but it's harder to evaluate at the same speed these cycles of creation. And so we worked with different criteria, from sun to structure to anything that were rather dumb, very simple, but mechanically optimizable. So we had Caramba for structure, we had Galapagos for the evolutionary optimization. And so you can see how, for instance, here Adrian had a roof that would follow some curves in the site and then hang some program on spots that were evolutionary found to be the kind of strongest or with the least deflection. And there was a whole goal of just getting a form based on one criteria and then seeing further. This is also a structural thing. And so basically one criterion and then create a synthesis with all the parameters that may enter a kind of analogic thinking about space and program, where you can see that the Minecraft simple kind of gate building then gets programmed, and you'll see more of it in the visual manual, and where the students really try to create a whole project for the site within, ergonomics, plans, sections, and stuff like that. But then, after each of them creates one project for the site, they had to fight both for space and for program, so that the program is limited. They have to agree who's doing what, where, and so we got these models. And then finally, after all the hardware is there, after the project negotiated the positions, the different programs, artist studios, architecture studios, visiting, blah, 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 we were still evolving behavior. And so we had this Arduino workshop where we thought, okay, that's not it. If we want to talk about processes, we're of course in parallel talking about interaction, because the designer has inputs at the beginning conceptually, the users may have inputs at some stage, and then at the end the hardware can still react to its use. So you can see kind of dark here the installation we have in the gallery, where we did big blown up parts of the whole site, interactive. So you'll know more of it in the afternoon when Galo's going to present the whole system. But each student was supposed to listen to one data, light, sound, deformation, or whatever, kind of manipulate it in a black box and send it to the other part that will have to react to it in a kind of network of influences. So very quickly here you can see a roof that now broke. I heard, I wasn't in the gallery yet, but overheated. That was reacting to light conditions. I mean, of course, you could plug the Arduino to any weather prediction or real sensor data. In this case, there was a sensor, and if you move around, it would supposedly close itself up or open. It wasn't working so well, but we're getting there. The piece here was interesting because if you press it and if you go to the gallery, that still works. So you put your hands on, and then it changes. And the idea was, okay, these are the galleries. You go up in a kind of this what's it called? The game there. Miner or something. And the more people there are, the kind of bigger atmospheric changes occur. So the light changes into a more maybe warning color, the sound, the air conditioning, and all that change. And then there was a final piece here, which was just programmed with different events, and based on how many people were walking around, it would adjust itself. So you can see the roof. And so that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Now it's time for a couple of questions and to keep a little bit discussion about your work, about Bratislava, about the academy in Bratislava. Maybe I would like to start with a very political or general question. Coding after many years, abroad experience, how you see the impact between Fine Art Academy space with kind of experimental architecture tests,
Right.
according to the chance the school is able to invite young colleagues from Vienna, for instance. Let's welcome Alex Karaivanov and Gal Monsayo, which are in the audience now here. And how you see the possible future of us as an outsider in the strange world?
Well, thanks. We discussed the role of the academies also in the States, because I was teaching there, and most people in practice agree that it's necessary to teach just because there's so many ideas that can be evolved, and so it's absolutely unavoidable. Also, I was rather happy with the results that kind of pushed me to experiment more and gave me kind of an outline, and really I was more learning, for instance, this year than usual. It comes with this idea also of smart things and whatever architecture can do when the intelligent components come and disrupt the kind of static structure. There's more and more of this that you'll see, and that is being kickstarted right now. So that's in terms of the research. It's important for me personally, it's important in general, I think. But the question is if it's sustainable at the school, and I have to say we'll see, because it's difficult currently with the funding also. But we're very happy that people are interested in getting the experience, in coming, in exchanging ideas. But if it has to be sustainable, if it would be possible to be at least slightly comparable level to other strong schools, then we need to change some of the structure, because there's very few people and few funding, and we get cut even more. So I don't want to be whining, but it's totally important, and I think somebody has to press the government stronger to explain why we're doing innovation, and why is it that one has to invest into this a lot at the beginning with a small chance of a big gain at the end.
think we are on time. Still a couple of minutes. If there are any other questions, you would like keeping discussion.
If they want to ask, but if not.
Hello.
Hey.
So if you got everything that you wanted, what would you do?
Did I say that?
No, you said that you don't have enough.
Right. You mean at school?
No, you said, well, which is, I think, the case in everything that is experimental. You start with something where you have to invest a lot of energy, and you don't know what the outcome is. That I think is also the thrilling part. I mean, you do things because you're interested in. You are something that was called, being quotation mark, an idealist, because you had certain ideas and then you try to make it work.
Right.
If somebody would guarantee you that everybody would be happy with what you're doing, it would be no fun.
Yeah, but there's something of a difference, I think, between the work and the support. And the same work can be done with different types of support. And I'm, happy within experimentation, but I think that what I was pointing to and what makes me a bit unhappy is that in this region specifically, Eastern kind of post-Cold War region, there is not so much support for the work, and I'm not saying it's about being happy or unhappy with the work, but it's about a misunderstood investment, because we were kind of the receiving end of all the trends. If you just think of how much design and thinking goes into anything, then and some of it works and not, fine, we can see, but I have a feeling that in this region we only got whatever was already tested, and nobody understands that to get one thing working, 99 have to die, but you have to support all 100. So there's a difference between work and support in that sense. Is that maybe?
Yeah. When the idea of the symposium was, let's say, born or being constructed, and I was talking to Martin a lot, he had this tricky notion of inside and outside. And you were the outsiders, and we seemingly were the insiders, which I thought was also a kind of trap.
Yeah.
Because just when you look at cultural production, let's say in literature, what is being as novels in the English language, it were always people coming from the periphery lately. It was the Indians, or people that had Indian ethnicity. Now it's people that come from Africa.
Yeah.
So, there is also a potential that the people that are coming from the outside do not have to reiterate the mistakes of the others, and they simply step on the shoulders of them. So even if there are things that have been tested, you have a kind of, let's say, virgin territory where you can do things without having a lot of baggage.
Yeah, I'm kind of an outsider, having been at the Angevante for some time, but the funny thing there was, obviously, I thought the most interesting parts were when the leadership was changing and when everything was messed up and when nobody knew what they're doing. And so maybe that's more of our case in Bratislava, in the school, where we don't want to get settled too much and happy exploring. So changing what is understood as outsiders, almost to the point where it may stop being politically correct as the different was, or the exotic, or the primitive, or the whatever. So I think what is good really is when there is the freedom of a lack of success and a lack of establishment, and that's what we have. But obviously, I guess that's going to be a complementary issue with funding. You either have one or the other. Okay. So, thanks.
Thanks all. Thanks, Peter.